Welcome to the Veritas Equipping Podcast, a podcast designed to provide insight, resources, and biblical wisdom. Our mission as Veritas Church is raise up mature disciples, send out everyday missionaries, glorify God. Join us as we pursue Jesus to become mature disciples and effective disciple makers for God's glory.
Veritas, welcome to our Equipping Podcast. We are in our series on church planting, and I'm joined again with Jordan Howell and Ryan Hill from the SALT Network. So we're excited to have this conversation. Week 2. So by the time this comes out, it's going to be the new year. Are you guys New Year's resolutions people?
Not really, because I always break them. So I just found it's better not to make them.
You've just quit.
Yeah, I just quit already before I made them.
Yeah, I kind of hate this about myself, but there is kind of the turning of the leaf that is just helpful in terms of reevaluating and saying, how do I want 2024 to look different than 2023? I don't make hard and fast resolutions, but I at least will typically take inventory and be like, okay, what needs to look different this year?
That's a way more godly response than mine, just to go on the record.
But yeah.
Do you write them down?
Typically I'll write my reading list down and say these are the, 12, 15 books that I need to read this year. But beyond that, typically it's accountability with Elliot.
So like a reading list for the new year.
Yeah.
You seem like a guy that's going to write your goals on your bathroom mirror, stare at them before you start your day.
Not quite, but I don't know. There's a place to evaluate. And Ellie and I having pretty strategic goals on this topic of church planting to say hey, what do we need to get done this year to be ready for 2025? And some of that is budget. And some of that is just rhythms of personal health, some of that. So one thing I know we plan on doing is pretty much acting like we're preparing to move in 2024 and buying a dumpster and getting going through what do we keep, what do we store, what do we donate, and what do we throw? And just doing that in 2024. So that way when 2025 comes around, it's not as crazy.
What's that? I don't know if it's a show or a person, but does it spark joy? Where the organizer? Marie Kondo. Yeah, you got to hold. Does it spark joy? Does it make you happy? If not, get rid of it.
Never heard of that.
The only reason I know that is that we were at a marriage conference. Mark did the final talk, and he talked about purging your life, and sometimes you got to get rid of things you like for the sake of things you love.
Yep.
I don't know why I thought of.
We have a lot of stuff we will probably get rid of because it's stuff that when we first bought our house in Cedar Rapids, both of our parents were like, hey, you have a house now. You can store this. And we haven't touched it since. So that dumpster will probably be full. That's a good thing.
I'm not a New Year's resolution person. I'm singular. It's the same one every year. Hence, I never reach it. I haven't quit yet. It's always,
unending. This
is the year I'm going to lose weight.
Yeah. You got it this year.
Yeah, but then you make your resolution because you've just come off of overeating, Thanksgiving to Christmas. This is the year. And then the Super Bowl hits.
Yep.
It's the chicken wing capital time of the world, And then you're
There's always next year.
And it's the February. You got a ways to go.
And it's winter in Iowa. What else you
got to put on your winter a little bit. It's for warmth. It's for warmth.
I always called this, this time of year eating season, especially when I was in wrestling season. I'm like, why does wrestling season always fall during eating season? Thanksgiving, Christmas, Super Bowl. It
is rough.
Tough time of year.
All right, let's jump in. Church planting. Last time we looked at what it is, just kind of basic. Why is church planting important?
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is just the vast need when you look out to the lostness of this world. And so, God's doing incredible work in a lot of local churches across our country and across our world. And yet there are still pockets and there are still areas and there are still people groups who haven't heard the gospel or haven't had much exposure to the gospel. And so it's important because there's a lot of lostness. There's still statistically the vast majority of adult baptism, so adults who are coming to faith in Jesus Christ, the vast majority of those are happening in churches that are 5 years old or younger. And so Veritas is a beautiful exception to the statistic, but statistically, if you're an older church, you're just not as good at reaching the lost people in your community. And so there continues to be a great need to plant new churches that lost people will be willing to check out and to go and to hear the good news of the gospel. The need is incredible.
Yeah. We talked about it a little bit in episode 1, but understanding that the Great Commission, in one sense, like requires church planting, and then looking at the model of the book of Acts of church planting, going to new cities, establishing new gospel outposts. Paul's, urge to Titus of appoint elders in every town. This idea of like, it's just what we see in the scriptures. So if we want to be obedient to the scriptures, we should say, what does that look like for us too?
How would you guys answer the pushback of saying like, okay, the book of Acts, the gospel is new, it's going to uncharted territory. I get missions to Papua New Guinea and China and India. We want to take it to unreached people groups, but cities in America, specifically campus towns, there's a lot of churches there. Why church plant nationally in America?
Yeah, one thing that's interesting demographically is, every country, every region is going to go through cycles in their interaction with Christianity. And if you go to the Northeast U.S. right now, clearly post-Christian and kind of like angry post-Christian, to where, in the Midwest still, if you talk to somebody in their 20s or 30s, they may not go to church, but they would say, oh yeah, but my parents did, or my grandparents did. Like, they're familiar with church. As we're interacting with students and young adults in the Northeast especially, they haven't ever been in a church building. Their parents didn't go to church, and maybe their grandparents did. And so those cycles are making their way through the U.S. I think specifically for our network, where we really target major university centers, I'm right now collecting a bunch of data from college ministries around the country, and it's been a little bit shocking and disappointing. I think the most generous estimate that I can find, and this would be like doubling the numbers that I've currently heard, would say that the average college campus has about 4% of their students that are engaged in some sort of Christian ministry or church. And that means 96% aren't. And many of those are believing students or students that spent, their growing up years in church, but have gone to college and have disconnected. But the vast majority of those are ones who have no personal understanding or relationship with Jesus. And so, those are almost like unreached people group type percentages, which just continues to be compelling that America was once very churched and is slowly becoming de-churched. And the college campus especially is really unreached.
Yeah. And I think we are a little bit blinded, by God's grace. We've seen a lot of people come through our church doors at Veritas who are, lost and have, heard the gospel, have believed it for the first time. But when you look statistically at church growth in America, I think it's like only 20% of churches in the United States are growing, and only 1% of that growth is through actually reaching lost people. So the majority of church growth nationally that we see is just recycling or shuffling around Christians, so it's like, how do we reach lost people? That's the mission of, the Great Commission, is reaching lost people. And you had alluded to church plants are more effective in reaching lost people.
Yeah, and some of that is not necessarily that the church plant is better equipped or better skilled. Part of it is a lost person, a non-believing person may be more willing to just check out something that appears new or is new to the community than an existing church. Because again, there are many existing churches that are really old and doing a great job reaching lost people. And so that's not universally true, but statistically does seem to be the trend kind of over time. And so, yeah, there's a great need, even though there are a lot of churches, but there's a lot of churches dying. And statistically, there's continues to be more churches dying than churches that are starting right now. And yet the population continues to increase. And so we're in theory losing the battle even in our country, which is one of the more churched ones around the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think to bring even a deeper, broader view, more than just reaching lost people, Piper says missions exist because worship doesn't. And I would put church planting in there as well. Like, church planting exists because worship doesn't. And when you look at cities, college campuses, overseas, and we see there is a God who's worthy to be worshiped, and he's not receiving that worship, we want to go and bring about more worshipers for the glory of God.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, one thing I'd add to that. So last year in 2022, across our network of 30 churches, there were over 1,000 baptisms. And because of the context that we've been in. And if you're if you've been around Veritas since the beginning, you would say, well, of course there is. We see, nearly 100 baptisms every year in this building. It's incredible. You may not know it, but that is a wildly incredible work of God that's really abnormal. And so when I interact with great church leaders around the country and they see the kind of work that the Spirit's been doing in literally bringing dead, lost people to life in the context of some of our churches, they would affirm God's doing something unique and incredible here. Don't assume it's the norm. And so if you're sitting in Veritas, you might think, man, this is an incredible church. God's doing an incredible thing. I bet he's doing this everywhere. And the answer is he's actually not right now. And so we need to help see more churches go to see this kind of ministry replicated.
Yeah. One thing I love that doesn't get talked about frequently, one of Tim Keller, one of his previous works that was published in 2002, Why Plant Churches, he talks about how church planting actually can strengthen other existing churches in the city. And yeah, there's this unique thing of, even these new people that might try this new church might come in and experience and hear the gospel for the first time, but then they might not I'm getting whiplash a lot from all of the changes that are coming with a new church. What if we got into a more established church? So they might first come to a church plant, but then they might also find another healthy local church in the region that's more established and get plugged in there. And even just the idea of church plants are forced to innovate and think differently and try new things that can come alongside existing churches and be like, hey, have you thought about this? What have you tried? And just, reinvigorate existing churches.
A lot of our conversation so far has been on the new place and the new city and the lost people there. I think also, though, if you turn around and look back home at the sending church, what does that do inside of the sending church? Anytime you send great leaders, you create leadership vacuums, and people look around and say, well, who's going to do that? There may even be some initial fear of how will we recover from losing that great leader? And the answer is God raises up and provides over and over and over again. And so there are, without a doubt, people sitting inside of Veritas Church who have the capacity and the giftedness to lead at a higher level than they're currently leading. And by planting a church, sending out great leaders and losing people, which is sad and hard, also creates a really great leadership vacuum for more people to step up into. I remember when Cornerstone planted Iowa City, Troy would say Mark Arendt was the best leader inside of Cornerstone's entire staff team. And yet he was the one who went and led a team to go plant in Iowa City. Well, one of the results with that was more leaders raising up inside of Cornerstone to carry the mantle of ministry that God had already been doing there. Mm-hmm. And so it's not just the benefit of the lost people in the new location, but the church back home who did the sending also grows in their leadership and gives more people capacity and opportunity to lead as well.
Yeah, Mark's a really big deal. We try to remind him of that often. Yeah. Plug for his book. If you haven't picked up his book, The Advantage of Average, would highly recommend it. World-renowned author, Mark Arendt.
A brief pause for our podcast to give a shout out to one of our sponsors.
All right, sum it up. One quick answer again to recap. Why is church planting important?
It's biblical.
Yeah, and it's needed desperately.
There you go, guys. We're going to continue on in this series, talking more about church planting. Hope you stay tuned. Love you guys.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Veritas Equipping Podcast. If you have any questions you would like us to address or ideas on how we can serve you better, please reach out to us by email at info@veritaschurch.org and put podcast in the subject line.